Going on to the last section of Chapter 1 that we're going to be covering, Section 11, we're going to take a look at multiplication, division, and order of operations. Again, we're dealing with integers in this section. We'll go over, again, these objectives and some really simple ones here. I think you may be familiar with the background rule, but when you have unlike signs, one is positive, one is negative, in multiplication, unlike signs, the answer is going to be negative. So, negative 20 here. Again, negative times a positive gives you a negative 45. Again, a negative times a positive gives you a negative 77. And some of these you may be able to say them before I do. A negative times a positive, negative 200. Now, they could be in any order, too. The first one could be negative. Negative times a positive, negative 9. Now, the rule changes when the signs are alike. That is, they're both negative or both positive. That gives you a positive. So, positive 24. 9 times 7 is 63, I believe. Yep. Negative times negative is a positive 80. Now, here's a case whenever you have a series of factors, and in multiplication, what we multiply together are called factors. 0 times something is always 0. So here's just a little summary. If they're both negative, you get a positive. If one's negative, one's positive, you get a negative. And the rule for 0. Anytime you multiply anything in a series of factors, if you find a 0, then the answer is going to be 0. The product is what comes about from multiplying factors. Now, again, the order of operation is interesting here. We could multiply the negative 3 times 10, or you could multiply the negative 5 times the negative 3. This would give you a positive 15 times 10 would be 150. So they're suggesting you multiply these two together. Now you could have done it the other way, but again you're looking for intuitive, reasonable ways of doing things. Now, another rule, too, is if you have an odd number of negative factors, your answer is going to be negative. So sometimes it's significant to determine what the end sign would be. So negative times negative times negative is a negative 8. Times 3 would be a negative 24. And again, keep track of the negative signs. 1, 2, 3, 4. An even number of negative signs. Your answer is going to be positive. So, this times this is a negative 15 times a negative 6 gives you a positive 90, and then these two negatives give you a positive 1, so the answer is 90. Now, this is a shorthand method of showing we want to multiply this -4 by itself 3 times. This is the exponent, this is the base. Now, if the exponent is odd, that same rule applies. A negative value to an odd exponent is going to end up being negative. As they show here, odd number of negative signs is a -64. Now, a negative value in the parentheses like this raised to an even power will be positive. So -3 times -3 is a positive 9. So here is an arrangement of a numerator, a denominator equals a result. And the letter B, that is the denominator here, can never be equal to a 0. We'll define that in a few minutes. Now, those same rules apply that we mentioned earlier. If you have like signs, 2 like signs, the results will be positive. So 2 negative, 2 positive give you a positive. If they're unlike signs, one's negative, one's positive, you end up with a negative result. So here they're both positive. 5 goes into 35 7 times. A negative time divided by a negative, again the answer is going to be positive, positive 7. Now notice here we have one unlike sign and another unlike sign. So the results here are going to be -7. And again, one unlike signs, -7. And they're showing you the value of it if you multiply it through. Again, the rules are the same signs, we end up with a positive. Unlike signs, we end up with a negative. And I might mention here, when you're doing fractions, keep your fraction bar horizontal. Now notice the negative sign is in the numerator. You could have put it next to the division bar. This is the conventional way of putting it. Generally, we don't like to have something in the denominator negative. We would put that negative by the division bar. But all of these are equivalent. All right, now another thing important, that anytime you are dividing something by 0, in our mathematical system, this is not defined. So we say it's undefined. Anything divided by 0 is undefined. That's what the answer is. You wouldn't leave it 5 over 0. The answer to that would be undefined. Now, 0 divided by any number that's not a 0, that's okay. And that always equals 0. But something divided by a 0 is not okay. All right. So, what is this? This is going to be 0. And what is this? Divided by a 0? Undefined. What is this? Divided by a 0? Undefined. Now, 0 divided by 0 is not that it's undefined. They give it a special name. Well, I guess they're calling it undefined here. I've heard it's not determined, but I guess they're going to call it undefined here. Okay. Now, Another important part here, and you may have recalled this before from whatever, is this: please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. You may have heard that before. It's an acronym for dealing with parentheses and exponents as you go from left to right, multiplication, division, whichever comes first. If division is first, you do division first. And then finally, after all of this is done, you do any addition, subtraction, again from left to right. This is called order of operations. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Now, for parentheses here, the P, this is a grouping symbol. The common one is parentheses. Another one that we find is brackets. Another, braces. Another grouping sign is the radical sign here. Absolute value. And another one that you might not think of is this division bar. That if you had like 3 plus 7 plus 2, this bar is sort of a grouping symbol over 4. You would group all of that first. Then you would do and deal with that. Okay, so order of operations. Now they're going to give us some examples to work, and they've done a nice job laying it out. So take a moment to copy this into your notes, because if I gave you this as a quiz question, I would have this as the quiz question, but then if you've worked it out on your paper in your open notes quiz, you'd have the answer there. You wouldn't have to work. So you might say, what do we do first? Well, as we go from left to right, there is a division here that we have to do. So 27 divided by -9 is a -3. Then we're just copying the rest of this. And then now what's the next thing? Well, we do this multiplication here. This is going to give us a -6. And then we don't do any addition yet. We're going to do next this multiplication, which gives us a -20. And now we just add up all our negative values, and we get a -31. So again, you'll be having practice as you shoot for a certification, and they take time. Be careful of your signs. Follow the order of operations. Now here we see the brackets and then parentheses and some exponents too. This one's a little tricky. So what we do first is get rid of our parenthesis here. Now this is a -5 squared, but the only thing that's squared here is the 5. The negative doesn't come in. So this is going to be 5 squared is a negative here, 25. And you are going to see that right there. There's your -25. Now, if it were in parentheses again, and then that was squared, it might be a -5 times -5. That's not what's written there. So now we do what's inside the parentheses. We're going to get a -22 here that we're going to divide by that 2. So there's the -22. We divide it by 2. We get a -11. Now we're going to join that -11 with the 5. That's going to give us a -6. We're going to multiply the -11 times the -6. Get a +6 66, and then we add the 9 to it, and end up with 75. Again, it may look a little daunting initially, but knowing the rules of operation, that's what you want to follow in a sequential way. And some of this you might be able to do in your head, but you don't want to end up with the wrong answer. Okay. So again, you go negative 11 times negative 6. Gave you that. You could have done it this part first, and then get the opposite of a negative. Again, you can tweak it a little bit. I like the way they did it first. Get the same answer. Okay, take a moment. Let's write this one out together here. I guess I can move it up a little bit too. There we go. Take a moment, pause if you need to write things down. So, as we start to solve this, we're going to square the 2 here. And over here you're going to put a what? A 4. So positive 4 and a negative 1 is going to give you a 3 down here. But keep in mind we also had to do this 2 squared there. That's going to be a 4 there. So we have a 4 there. So 4, 4. When we combine this, we get a 3. There's our 4. So what do we do next now? Well, we're going to do this multiplication here. 9 times 3 is 27. Right there. And we're going to do this also here shortly, I guess. So we keep the 27 there. We then do this. Negative 6 times 4 is a negative 24. So we could add our 2 negatives together and get a negative 31, which I believe is what they're going to do here. No, they subtracted the negative 7 first. Again, that's another way to do it. Perfectly fine. And again, they're doing it from left to right. Okay. So now we end up with a negative 4. Okay. That winds us up.